Ron.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Paul Whitcomb. I'm here with Camillus Robinson, the good-looking devil in the cap, and John William Toohey with the very attractive red blazer. Today's subject is the murder of Chicago businessman Danny Seifert in September of 1974. As the 60s turned to the 70s, the Chicago outfit was at the very peak of its power. As Giancana's era waned and Joey Aiuppa's dawned, the outfit saw that it stood head and shoulders above organized crime families throughout the world as the most powerful criminal organization ever seen. Somehow, a young entrepreneur by the name of Danny Seifert got introduced to Milwaukee Phil Alderisio, then the boss of the Chicago outfit. He also met Joey Lombardo, Tony Spilatro, and a host of characters, and he eventually wound up investing in a business with these gentlemen. And as you might expect, when you get involved with the outfit, it didn't go well. Today, we have two very special guests. On the telephone, we have Mr. Nick Seifert, the son of Danny.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
And we have his brother, Joey. And it's a privilege to have you two gentlemen here to talk about what happened with your father that day in September of 1974 and how it's affected your lives.
Thanks for having us.
You're
Yeah, thank you.
great to have you here. Firstly, all of us are really sorry for what happened to your dad.
Yeah.
You know, Nick, we spoke privately, you, me, and Paul, and you really were, you were adroit. You were just perfectly clear on what happened. So we'll go into more detail, you know, on how your dad got mixed up with these guys. You think you could do that again for us? Walk us through. You're now 13?
No, I was 12, 13 years old, yeah.
Excuse me, and Joe, if you want to throw something in, please go ahead. So we're going to hand it to you, and when you're done, we'll hit you with some questions. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You comfortable with that? Is everybody okay? All right.
Absolutely.
So tell us, you're sitting in school and the police show up.
Correct, yeah. Well, we're sitting in school, and obviously what had happened first was the Bensonville police came and got my sister out of class. Now, we were in the same school, but not in the same classes. So what had happened was they showed up, got us out of class, and took us into the counselor's office. And that's when they proceeded to, with the counselors and everything else there, ask us questions about my dad and everything else, you know. And that's when I turned to my sister and I just put my finger up to my mouth, told her, we don't talk about anything that goes on in the house. Because she started to say stuff. And then we didn't talk. And then they said, well, you know, we need to talk to you guys and this and that. Now, bear in mind, we had no idea what was going on, what Joe and my mom and everybody has already been through. So then we waited a little bit, and then they talked about, well, maybe we'll separate the kids and try to talk to each one of them individually. I said, no, you're not separating us. We're here together, but we're not talking. And then about 5 minutes later, my mom showed up with the FBI. And that's when we got into, you know, they escorted us into the car. And I seen Joey right away. And, you know, Joe told me there was a robbery. And I said to him, the robbery, there's nothing there to steal. And I wanted to continue to talk to my brother. You know, he was small, but I still wanted to try to talk to him and get information about what went on. Because he told me, he said, well, Dad was hurt.
Let me just clarify for the listeners. At this point, you had no idea your dad had been murdered. Right?
No.
And Joe, you're 4 years old?
Yeah, I was about 4.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So.
That's all right.
Yeah, so then my mom, you know, looked back at us and seen I was trying to, you know, talk to my brother, and, you know, she didn't want me to do that, so I just told him we'll talk later. And then, like I told you, that what we did was we went to my grandmother's house, and my brother, like I told you, he kind of, I would say almost kind of went into like a shock almost, because it was, he didn't talk for a while.
No.
And which you can imagine, he was traumatized and everything else. So we didn't discuss anything. And while all the adults were out in the other room, I plugged in the TV, or I just turned on the TV, and it was all over the news and everything else by then. And then that's when my mom came in and told us, hey, that your father was, she didn't say killed. She said your father was killed in an accident or something like that. Yeah. And then that's when we found out. See, one of the things is my mom has never, ever told my brother and I anything. We've always had to look for other ways or other avenues to find out exactly what happened that day and or what led up to those events,
To shield you?
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I assume that's what it was. The whole family was don't ask, don't tell kind of for a very long time.
Yeah.
Or if you did ask, it was extremely minimal. It was minimal information that you'd get.
Yeah.
And it was very kind of a circle, around the circle, not to the point.
One of you guys, do you have your book nearby?
I got it.
Why don't we show the cover, because even now it's an interesting conversation. So
why don't you have a signed one?
Yeah.
You know what? I got it before I started talking to you, and because I really wanted to read it, and so I'm going to have to hook up with you and get it signed. Deadly Associates by your mother Emma Seifert, Joe and Nick with Matthias McCarn. True story behind the murder of Daniel Seifert and the conviction of reputed mob boss Joey the Clown Lombardo 3 decades later. It's really a hell of a read. I don't want to interrupt your story, but really, you really add a human touch. You get a feel about the consequences of some of the outfit action. I think that
right.
People see there was a murder. They see that, and I've spoken to both of you shortly about this, but that there was a murder. I think that people know that there were a lot of murders in the 70s, but they don't think about what took place in the families. They don't realize that these were actual men who died. These men had families. Something took place. There were funerals. There were loved ones, and you really get a sense that for every name that's on a list of someone in an outfit, there was a family who was affected. And there were major consequences, and your book really breaks that down, and what happens to a family, and how how the next generation deals with it, and how wives and loved ones are really taken in by this. And I really appreciated that, and how your investigation really drove it home. That was just an incredible story you both told.
I appreciate you saying that, because one of the biggest reasons that we decided to write the book was because there's this glorification and glamorization of the mobster and the person that's actually doing or committing the crime. And there's nothing with everybody else that's involved.
Yes.
Or the people that are, like you said, affected by it, and what they go through just searching for simple answers of what happened. I mean, my brother and I, we were searching for 40 plus years.
I think one of the tragedies here is your dad was a young man. He was 27.
Yeah, he was.
Well, actually, to be honest with you, he was like 24 when he first met Alderisio.
Yeah.
He was 29. He was 29 when they actually killed him.
Right.
But from 24 on, he was I would say from 24 to 27, those 3 years, he was pretty strong and tight knit with, Alderisio, Lombardo, and all those guys. It wasn't until, he was around 27 where he started to have that fallout.
Let me, people, by the way,
when the feds came after him.
Is Phil Alderisio, he was what would you call him, a capo at that, captain, a crew captain?
No, at that time he was the boss.
During that time, there was an interim period. Paul Rica had just died, and Sam Giancana was on the outside, and that was actually killed in '74. There was an interim period when there were some bosses in between. Alderisio was the boss. He was a notorious hitman prior to that, and he was really a bad character. The men who were the bosses during the '70s were not sort of the more thoughtful figures of the earlier time. They were real killers, and Alderisio was at the top of the pile. He was long known as a hitman, and he basically clawed his way up. So he was a really bad character to get involved with, but he was also had a lot of power and generated a lot of money. So he was in a lot of ways a safe character to be under his wing. In a lot of ways, it was smart.
You guys know that when I was born, one of the names that was being thrown around besides Joe was Felix.
No kidding.
Yeah.
After Alderisio, they were very close friends with.
Yeah.
He would be
Alderisio really liked my dad.
Oh yeah.
He would be a safe person to be under his wing. I mean, if you were going to be under somebody's wing in the outfit, Phil Alderisio would be the one.
Exactly. That's why I think there was, because of how his relationship was with Alderisio, and then later on with Lombardo, that's why I think there was some animosity and a little bit of jealousy with Tony Spilotro, because Spilotro was Alderisio's guy too, and that's why there was a little bit of, conflict with my dad and Spilotro. I mean, they knew each other, and, they were, so to speak, cordial with each other at the few times that they were around each other. Well, actually more than what probably my brother and I knew of. My dad met, Spilotro many other occasions, but there was always that little, rivalry, so to speak. And I think a lot of it stemmed from Lombardo and Alderisio, because
Spilotro did not like my dad.
Right. I think Spilotro struck me as a really ambitious guy, and he would see anybody who cut off his time with the bosses is sort of a figure who was more in the way. Right. And that's kind of what I got from him. So I could see why he would not like a young guy coming up and having FaceTime.
Yeah.
Especially a guy that was just an associate and wasn't really a made guy or anything
Absolutely.
else.
And he had time in the inner circle. Yeah, I could see why that would cause problems.
The question was, Nick, your dad's a young guy, so you just said it. Joe, what's his background? So he's a guy, a Chicago guy.
Good question.
How did he begin to fall in with these clowns? What?
Well, I think you're talking about Spilotro?
Your father.
Oh, my father. Well, my father, he was an ambitious businessman, really. I mean, he wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a gangster. He was just a smart. I would say he was like a smart guy. He was an engineer.
Pretty smart kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Hustling
And he was ambitious. He was a hustler and knew how to make money. And I think that's what actually he went to work and did a couple jobs for Irwin Weiner. And that's what turned him
doing handyman work. Right.
That's what kind of turned him into developing a relationship with Irwin Weiner, and then that led to other people.
Yeah.
Of course, it wasn't. It was a lot of it had to do with people will say, well, how did he meet Irwin Weiner? Well, he met Irwin Weiner through my uncles.
But we have to stop and tell people who Irwin was, Paul.
Yeah, Irwin Weiner from American Bonding, a bail bondsman. Right. And a non-Italian, very close associate and money man of the Chicago outfit, whose fingers were involved in a great number of their rackets and whose name comes up again and again and again. His American Bonding is where Lombardo and Spilotro and that group of guys hung out, spent their time, had their meetings. Mm-hmm. He was central to this group of gentlemen in this period of time.
And he was power. He was a power. So
yes.
Irwin Weiner goes all the way back to John F. Kennedy.
Yes, yeah. A lot of one of the unique things about the outfit is that it wasn't so Italian centric as some of the other crime organizations in areas like New York. So because they were more accepting of figures outside, Irwin Weiner and guys like Gus Yelix, I think that sort of helped them be more open to a guy like your father coming around. He wouldn't have bumped up against the sort of the glass ceiling that he would have met in other places. So they were much more accepting of non-Italians, and so there wouldn't have been he wouldn't have been held back as much. They would have been more open to his presence.
Because I think back then the mob only thought about one color.
Yes,
whether they were Italian or nothing, whether they were green. and it was all
Exactly.
about cash. And
Exactly.
if you could make cash for the mob, it didn't matter what nationality you were in. And that's where my dad, I think was successful, and he could make cash because he knew about manufacturing fiberglass and
He was smart.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just he had some street smarts too, where I mean he had sort of come up since he was young, he had sort of raised himself in a way, right? Just because of some family things. And so your father had some street smarts, right? And that was what he knew how to handle himself around all kinds of people. And that was why he wasn't naive around these outfit characters, but he did it at 24 years old. He was handling himself. He was making money legitimately, and he wasn't allowing himself to be taken advantage of too much. I mean, he was a smart guy. He was street smart, and he was also running his own business. I mean, your father was a smart man.
Nick,
Sure.
do you want to fill him in on what would be the uncles and
Well, sure.
our grandpa?
Well,
how far back it goes?
right. Well, actually, which is what you guys are touching base on. The reason why he was street smart and clever and a fighter and everything else is because his father died. My grandfather died when he was 12 years old. And he died of a heart attack. He wasn't killed by the mob, but he also did a lot of financial work for the mob, which what they used to do back in those days was my grandfather was a high profile realtor, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And what they would do is find people houses that would be able to purchase a house and make the payments, but yet they knew that they would default. And so when they defaulted, they take back the house and then keep, just like, a repo company. And that's what they would do is default on loans and stuff like that with condos and apartment buildings and stuff like that in the early days. And
like exactly what the banks were doing in the 2000s.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what I was. Yeah.
And so what had happened was somehow my grandfather got entangled and actually had a violent streak and did kill somebody. And what had happened was then the whole family moved to California because the mob told them, hey, listen, you got to get out of here for a little while and we're going to, settle things down. We'll figure this out. So then the whole family moved to California. And then 3 years later, they all moved back to Chicago. Well, once they moved back to Chicago, that's when it was within a year, my grandfather passed away and died. And they were very wealthy people, actually. They had, drivers, they had limos, they had horses and stuff, rather big house for back in those days, So then what happened is then he passed away, and then boom, the IRS came in and seized everything. So my dad went from being a wealthy kid, so to speak, to being a broke kid. And then had to try to strive and learn the ropes and everything else on his own. So then as he got into his teens, he had two brothers, which was my Uncle Bob and my Uncle Tom. Well, my Uncle Bob, was like 18, 19, got drafted, bang, went to Germany in the service. He was in the army. Well, my Uncle Tom stayed behind. He was a little bit older, but he was a little bit slick with the government and said that, he had hearing problems and eye problems and this and that. And then my grandmother had some ailments as well. She had hearing and eye problems. So he could tell the government that he had to stay behind and not get drafted to take care of my grandmother. So that's how my Uncle Tom then proceeded to get involved with the mob. And my Uncle Tom was the one, I believe, that lured my father into the mob anarchy and got him connected with some guys here and there. And then that's how he met Erwin Weiner.
What's really interesting to me, and I don't think it can be emphasized enough, is your dad must have been an extremely competent person. He essentially meets Irving Weiner by doing odd jobs, shows him what he can do in the garage with fiberglass, and he takes him to the boss of the outfit, the most powerful criminal in the country, just like that. And your dad turns that into a relationship. I mean, he must have been an incredible man at 24 to be ushered into that kind of a criminal's presence and trusted with his money.
Exactly.
I think he was cocky, and not cocky in a bad way, though. He was confident.
Yeah. Charisma.
And a lot of the guys from over the years of talking to people, everybody said, God, you know, what happened to your dad was horrible. We really liked him. He was a really nice guy. He was really smart. He had a lot of ambition, and, you know, it was just shitty what happened to him.
Well, can you tell us a little bit? It also shows how seriously they took your dad, the amount of planning and the heavy hitters that were involved in what happened. And Nick told us the other night what he had found out over the years about the incredible planning that went into this. And it's really a fascinating story.
Let me, can I ask for, you're right, of course it is, but so we don't confuse people. Why'd they kill the guy? He's a boy genius. He's in with the highest echelons at this point. I think they've got, I might be wrong, but I think they've got some money in his company. Why kill him?
Well, they killed him because the IRS was always after these guys, you know, like Lombardo and everybody else on tax evasions and everything else. And what had happened was the IRS went to my dad and said, hey, listen, we're going to throw your ass in jail. We've got you on money laundering to the Teamsters Union and yada, yada, yada. So then my dad was not spooked. You couldn't really spook him. He was cocky and confident, and he thought he was a tough guy. So then what happened was he went back to the mob and said, hey, listen, guess what? We got a problem. The feds are now starting to bark up this tree with the Teamsters loans coming into International, and they were funneling the money from International Fiberglass to Las Vegas. And so my father was constantly talking to Lombardo about it, and Lombardo says, well, we'll play it by ear. We'll play it by ear. So the mob, the higher people above Lombardo, which was Jackie Cerrone and then Tony Arcardo, weren't so confident that my dad wasn't going to talk. And they were concerned because at that time, my dad was a tough guy. He wasn't able, they weren't able to intimidate him because they tried to intimidate him and threaten him and everything else. And my dad would just come back because I would hear the phone calls at night. People would call the house and try to scare him and intimidate him. He'd tell them the same thing. One time I heard a conversation where they threatened our family. And I heard my dad on the phone tell him, hey, listen, you tell those guys they got a fucking family too. And I'll do whatever it takes. I don't care. I know where this is leading. I'll do whatever it takes. So they knew the reason why they had to kill him is because they knew they had a problem.
Yeah.
They knew that my dad was pissed about cash, about the money, you know, that was going through the International. He didn't feel like he was getting well compensated. He didn't like the idea, because this was his future. He didn't like the idea of them, so to speak, sucking the cash out of the business. And then if the business went bankrupt, he had nowhere to go. It was his name on everything. So it was just like when they buy a restaurant or something and they just add up the charges and then they burn the place down. Mm-hmm. That's a true story, because that's exactly what they did to International Fiberglass. They ran up the bills. Once the IRS started giving them a hard time and complications, then it was my dad and Lombardo that says, hey, listen, let's torch the place.
Well, also, he wasn't going to go to jail. I mean,
Right.
He made that clear, too. I'm not going to go to jail, and not for a day, not for 2 years, whatever it is.
They were making up a bunch of phony invoices. There was a shell game between their different businesses, correct? I mean, they would bill to one business and write an invoice to International Fiberglass and write a check. I mean, it was, they would get gambling income and launder it through one business by writing a check from International Fiberglass for work that hadn't been done. And I mean, basically, it was a shell game to launder money from one business to the next, and that was how they were using it.
Yeah, like the bail company in New Mexico.
Right, in the bail company, correct. Yeah.
I mean, it was empty. There was nothing in it.
Yeah, and the other company that was involved, kind of a sister company, so to speak, was Gaylor Products.
Right, Gaylor Products.
who Harold Lurie was involved with, and Tony Spilotro. A lot of people think that Tony Spilotro had some dealings with International, and that's not true at all. Tony Spilotro would come to International only to see the guys, like Ralphie and Joe Lombardo and Irwin Weiner and whoever else may show up. But Spilotro, his hub, so to speak, or his office, or where he went to also launder money from, was with Harold Lurie and Gaylor Products. Well, what they did was they intertwined the two companies, and one company wrote a check to International, my dad wrote a check to Gaylor Products, so that it could cover some payroll expenses for Tony Spilotro to be able to siphon money out of that company, and then Joe Lombardo would be able to siphon money out of International. And that's how the two companies intertwined. And that's why they needed my dad, because it was a complex thing. It was very complex how they were laundering the money, and then how they were siphoning the money out to Las Vegas.
So back to Paul's point, at this point they've decided we're just going to kill this guy.
Exactly.
So what happened? What happened?
Well, getting back to what we were discussing, I was at school when the event happened.
Right.
And when my dad and my brother and my mom left the house, like I said, this was a well-orchestrated hit. They had spotters on the road. There were 2 and 3 cars down York Road. So when my brother and my father and my mom left the house, they had already developed a plan. And Lombardo was going to be in the getaway car that was already at Plastomatics Products. And then, like I told you, John Ficarata was going to be one of the guys that entered the factory with Spilotro. That didn't happen. Once, because they had two-way radios and everything else. Once they seen that there were 2 other individuals in the car as my dad was going to work, because he would take, obviously, Foster Avenue, York Road to Foster Avenue. And on York Road, there was a car there that's radioed ahead and said, hey, listen, there's a few other people in the car. What do we want to do? Do we want to call off the hit, or what are we going to do? And everybody says, no, it's already too late.
Yeah,
because he was going to testify.
To school that day.
Yeah, he was going to, right. Joe was supposed to be in school, but he wasn't. He was sick. So, and they already knew that my dad, they might not have another opportunity because my dad was going to testify or go to the grand jury and under indictment and go to the grand jury and tell his story. So then they proceeded with the hit. And that's when Lombardo changed a little bit of the plan and decided to be the one that was inside the factory, and then John Ficarata would stay outside in the getaway car. Because once they turned on to Foster Avenue, now back in the day there were some railroad tracks there. There still are, but there's a new fire department there. Well, right about where that fire department is where I found out there was another car, what they used to call a blocker car. And he had his hood up like he was having car trouble. And then radioed ahead and said, hey, listen, they're now just approaching Foster Avenue and they're coming through. And then what had happened was they came right in, my dad came right into the entrance of Plastomatics, of the manufacturing complex. It was a complex with, different little factories that were in that area.
Bunch of like small factories.
Small little factories.
Not a big place.
So what had happened was he had opened up, they pull up right to the front door, and then he gets out of the car. My mom and Joe get out of the car and gather their belongings. My brother brought some cars and stuff like that, to keep him busy. This was on a Friday morning, September 27th. And my dad proceeded to get out of the car and unlock the front door. And then turned around, let them in, my brother and my mom, and then went back into the trunk to get the vacuum cleaner because my mom was going to clean up the office that day. And then that's when my brother and my mom were surprised because there were already people inside the factory. And those people, like I told you, the plan had changed. Joe Lombardo was going to be inside now because he knew who these killers were. And just like I told you before, usually they kill everybody.
Right.
So
Now that's why Lombardo, Joe Lombardo wasn't supposed to be there that day.
right.
He was told not to go there, and he made sure that he went there that day because he knew the crew that they sent usually kills everybody.
Yeah.
They at the time, I was looking at one of the FBI documents. They were naming Lombardo, Feccarata, Nick Montos, Frank Schweiss, and Nick Iacovetti were who they placed there at the time. That's what the released FBI documents were among the names that were involved in the. So it was a whole crew of guys.
Right.
Oh yeah, there were.
But specifically, Lombardo was there, and he told not
exactly.
to.
And that was exactly. Yeah.
So what then in turn happened was when my father walked into the factory, the two individuals that first intercepted him was Tony Spilatro and Frank Schweitz. And Tony Spilatro shot him immediately, right in the face, shot him right in the cheek. And then that's when there was a struggle and they started pistol whipping him and everything else. And Frank Schweitz tried to handcuff him and he couldn't. My dad was having no part of that. Because just like I told you before, the whole reason for the handcuffs is they weren't going to kill him on that site. They were going to just, grab him, take him to an enclosed area, and then torture him for information to find out what he was talking to the feds about, and then probably killing him somewhere else. Not killing him at that site. It was only when my dad broke away and was able to fight these two guys off, Tony Spilatro and Frank Schweitz, then the chase began. But before that chase began, when they were still pistol whipping him and everything else, that's when Joe Lombardo came through the back entrance of the factory and grabbed my mother and grabbed my brother and threw them into the bathroom. So they weren't able to see any of it or get hurt. And then that's proceeded. Then my father broke away, and then that's when the chase happened.
Yeah, he specifically put us in that bathroom to keep us safe from everybody else because they were all focused. My dad took off running. So they were focused on him and trying to catch him. So he put us in the bathroom where he knew we'd be safe because they weren't coming back.
Right. So, and then what had happened was obviously what everybody knows. My father escaped out of Plastomatics Products and then went to an adjacent company, which was Nielsen's Tool and Die Company. Well, prior to actually entering the door of Nielsen's Tool and Die Factory, Frank Schweitz shot him in the leg with a 12-gauge shotgun. And that's why my dad was stumbling and couldn't actually run as fast as he probably could. And then once he came out of Nielsen's, now Frank Schweitz is following him. Once he came out of Nielsen's factory, that's when another guy, Joe Hansen, shot him again and shot him in the upper torso. And then that's when my dad staggered towards that tree that you see. And now that's when Joe Hansen came up and shot him directly in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. Now, once that all stopped right there, time stood still right there. Now you got to think, this hit has gone on for 10 minutes.
Yeah, easy.
People were calling the police. You could hear sirens, what have you.
People were calling the police so much that when my mom was calling the police station, the line was busy. She couldn't get through because so many people were calling at the same time.
And these guys knew that they were knew they were jeopardizing the hit or they knew they were absolutely 100% getting away, because they also took the time to go back into the factory and get the briefcase that my father had. So they were dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And it was almost like, it wasn't like they were putting their ass on the line by taking too long. It was almost that they knew they had enough time to do it.
They knew they were getting away.
And they knew that their escape travels were 100%. There were cops here and there that were chasing them that were called off, by their time clock managers, or their sergeants. And they were called off. Then once they got to, they took the back way towards Grand Avenue in 83. I don't know if you're familiar with Chicago, but that's how they escaped. And they went that way and then came up to a car dealership, which was Key Pontiac at that time. And then that's when I told you that they had waiting cars, even at Key Pontiac. But there was a guy at Key Pontiac that was a convicted criminal. He was a convicted guy that did some crimes or whatever, but he was doing some work there, yard work or asphalt work or something like that. And when those guys piled out of the getaway cars and piled into another car, that guy recognized some of the guys and he knew exactly what was going on. He knew it was a hit. And then that's when Spilatro and everybody else went their separate ways. And they were still identified because they still got into accidents. There was still a little bit of a high-speed chase going on as they were heading down Grand Avenue.
Let me ask. I want to ask Joey because he was there, and then maybe we could skip ahead. You were talking to us, Nick, because you were older now, a lot older.
Yeah.
About the effects it had, the revenge. Actually, you're a gun wholesaler now, right?
Right, correct.
I just want to wonder if, we'll talk about it. But let me ask Joe, so you're 4 years old, I know. Do you have any memory?
The memory I have is everything up to the point where they're fighting and he gets shot through the cheek.
Oh.
After that, I remember going in the bathroom, but after that, like everything's blank until I'm in the back of one of the cars. I assume it was one of the police cars, and we're driving by and I saw him tangled up laying in the grass. But literally that's it. That's all I remember after that. Like everything was kind of blank. I remember, a little bit of the funeral, nothing of the wake or anything. And then that's really it. Really that short period of time.
A friend of this program is a guy named Frank Maritati, who's a good friend of ours, and he's appeared a few times. His father was Frankie Diamond, and he was slightly, not a lot, but slightly older. Do you know his story?
I don't know his story.
Slightly older than you, and pretty much the same circumstances. Frankie Diamond. They needed to get rid of him. They didn't know what he was going to, and they killed Diamond in the car with his son. I mean, this is really unusual. Everyone, I don't know too many instances
in the 50s.
Yeah, I don't know too many. Yeah, and anyway, he is a lot like you. He had to undergo. What did he? A psychiatrist helped him to recall some of those moments, but he had blocked it out completely.
I wanted to do that as well. Do like like where you go under hypnosis and they kind of
that's what he did.
Slowly take you back and pull you through. Yeah.
But he did remember because lobs of hair slightly after the murder fell from his head, or he pulled them out of his head. So he had a subconscious memory. He just didn't bring it up.
Yeah.
That's horrible. Your sister is okay these days, I hope. Or?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And let me ask you, your mom. What? I mean, now she's got 3 kids. The business is gone, right?
She
tried to struggle
after. Yeah, she struggled for a little bit, and then she dissolved it after that. She couldn't do it on her own. She didn't have the mechanics, or my dad was, I don't want to say the brains, but my dad was the mechanics of it. He was the engineer and everything of the business and everything that they did. Wow. As much as she could learn, she could only do so much.
You think about being a single mother in the 70s, and things were different for women back then. It just must have been incredibly hard for her. Just women. It's just the times were different, and especially to have had that happen to And as I said, I've read the book, but just from a standpoint of society, it just must have been so hard for a woman back then with 3 children.
Let me interject too. What a lot of people don't understand is, picture this, okay? He was killed, working for the government, working with the government. A lot of people don't know this. Working for the government, trying to help him with this case and whatever. Here my mom, now he's died. He's gotten killed the way he did. Now my mom's got 3 kids she's trying to raise. Now everybody walks away from us. The FBI tried to seize my father's bank accounts. They tried to they would not let us collect Social Security. My mom couldn't collect Social Security for the kids or herself until all my dad's taxes were paid. I mean, this was something that, what really begins to lay down the background of the depression stage and anger stage and animosity stages, because the government who started this whole thing, I wouldn't say it was their fault, but now they were continuing where the mob left off. The government was making it a problem for us. We could not talk to anybody. There was no such thing as government help. There was no such thing as psychiatrist or anybody for Joe and I to grow up and try to talk to. It's been a double-edged sword. With being in the arms business or even being a gun owner, period, you can't talk about mental health.
Yeah.
Because you'll lose your guns,
Exactly.
you know, or the right to sell guns or whatever. So picture us growing up. Not only did the mob do what they did, then the government did what they did. They fumbled the case many times. There was so much corruption where everybody knew who killed my father and who was responsible, as you could read in the newspapers, but yet they couldn't drag these guys into court or prosecute them or convict them. And then the government, like I said to you, the government went through hell, it seemed like to us, that they would not let my mom collect Social Security. They seized some of the assets. They tried to seize his bank accounts. So here, and then picture this, Joe and I growing up our whole lives, not really even knowing what went on outside of trying to find out from ourselves, because the government wasn't talking to us. There were only certain individuals in the police departments that Joe and I found, people that were connected or what have you, that would give us.
That was after a long period of time, though. Everybody, anytime you go to the police station, you would always hear the same thing. Sorry, this is an ongoing investigation. We can't talk to you about anything.
But as a young woman, like getting back about my mom, as a young woman, can you imagine what she went through? Everywhere she turned, there was a door. No one would help her. Here she is. She's got 3 kids, a young lady. You know, she was only 27 at the time this happened. And here she was, a young lady.
And then on top of it, you got all the guys, you know, Uncle Joe used to always come around, Uncle Joe, and now all of a sudden nobody comes around.
He's gone.
All of a sudden everybody's a ghost, you know, they're all.
But at the same token, this is how crooked the government is too. At the same token, the government did all this stuff, you know, wouldn't let us collect Social Security, seize assets and everything else. And then here comes Pete Wax, the head of the FBI, no different than Richard Kane back in the 60s, which was the new Pete Wax, so to speak. He was crooked. He had mob connections. And here she was trying to work with Pete Wax to find out who really killed my dad, because at that time there was only suspects, no one knew. And here Pete Wax was turning around giving information to the mob or giving information to everybody else that she was trying to help. And what were they trying to get her to do? Here she is, 27 years old, and they're trying to pump her for information, and she really didn't know a hell of a lot. But that just goes to show you the kind of individual the government is too, that here they did all the stuff that they did to us as a family, but yet then Pete Wax and different people in the government are the FBI are trying to get information and then they're coming after us and trying to tell us that, hey, you guys know more than what you're talking about, you know?
Yeah.
It was like a double-edged sword, so to speak.
Yeah, there was just nowhere for y'all to turn. And you know, to what extent are they trying to hold your feet to the fire, like you said, or the government trying to pump you for information, and like you said, withholding Social Security is sort of a ransom to try and get information, to get cooperation that your mother was probably not able to provide, and that was how they sort of held out for it. You know, that's not the kind of thing that they would ever admit or make reports about, but one department, you know, would say, well, don't pay her until.
Yeah, they thought she had hidden documents and stuff like that, you know, that of what my dad was actually going to testify. Because listen to this, my father didn't really trust them either. So he held back. He gave them enough to get an indictment and to get enough to maybe get back at these guys, but he didn't give them everything. That whole surprise was going to come the day of the indictment and day of the court. And that's why they clipped him, is so that because no one really knew what he was going to say when it came down to the court date. you know, what the questions were going to be or what he was going to testify for. And that's why they just said, forget it. He's got to go. He's
Nick,
a,
before we leave there, I know both you guys a little bit. I've spoken to you. Well, you've got a sense of humor because unlike the other two people, you laughed at my joke. You've done well in life. You're okay.
You got a sense of charity.
yeah.
Yeah. I've met people in your circumstances similar, and they're angry, and they don't do well because they're very badly traumatized. Was it your mom who kept you on the straight and narrow? Was it somebody in your life? How did you? You've done well. You've landed on your feet. What was the influence?
Well, truthfully, I think it all developed to revenge. I didn't get in any trouble or anything else because I wanted to be a ghost. I knew who my targets were and who I was going after, but I knew I couldn't go after them if I was in jail or if I was a dope addict or whatever. That's why I stayed straight and narrow, got into the gun business. Once I got into the gun business and I learned about guns, it was all over. Especially when I could learn about guns, learn how to track people down. That was my biggest tool. And I knew from day one that somebody, whoever it was that was responsible for it, was going to die. And they weren't just going to die. They were going to be tortured just like my family was tortured.
Was that the reason you went into selling guns originally?
Well, you know,
I think you just go with what you know, right?
I was fascinated with guns because my father was fascinated with guns. We had guns all over the house.
Everywhere, all over the
We
house.
had guns.
They were everywhere.
My father taught us about guns, you know, and once this all happened, I just it just stuck with me, and I had, you know, the ambition with firearms.
Well, there was a gun store that was close to where we were living,
Yeah.
and you worked there for a long time.
Yeah, yes, I did. I did everything there from cleaning the ranges, you know, shoveling lead, to making reloads, to fixing guns, to selling guns, everything. I did all facets of the gun business at that gun shop. And
Having a focus, having an interest, period, you know, and whatever drives it, whether it's revenge or whatever, and it makes sense to have that singular target of revenge, but that branched out into an interest in guns and whatever. I think that contributed also, you know, whether you're in, you know, people have, it's sort of more than a hobby, you know, it's something that you direct all your energies into, and it doesn't give you time to, you know, because it just, you know, probably not every wake minute was just going after. I mean, you had an interest in these things. You were focused on reloading. You were focusing on, you know, subsonic ammunition. You were looking at, you know, pistol rounds, rifle rounds. You had interests.
And not only that, but it was also an outlet for me to find out information, because the place, the gun shop that I worked at was called Underworld Incorporated, and it was on Irving Park Road in the 70s. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but the guy that owned it, his name was Jerry Soskin. Well, Jerry Soskin was a street cop, and Jerry Soskin was a little pissed off with also the ways that the mob handled this whole thing. And Jerry Soskin was the guy that kind of took me under his wing and taught me about reloading. That was one of the first things he taught me about reloading. And I could never understand, because I wanted to run before I could walk. And I wanted to learn about guns and everything, how to take them apart, put them back together. He says, everybody wants to learn that, and you can learn that. But right now you need to learn about ammunition and reloads. And I didn't realize what he was trying to teach me, but he was teaching me everything, like I had talked to John about short loads. And if you want to shoot a gun, and let's just say it's a 45 automatic. We all know 45 automatics are loud guns. But if you're going to shoot a load or a round at a short distance, that round is still going to travel 30 yards. So you could cut the gunpowder, the grains of the gunpowder down in that casing to where the primer still ignites a short load, and it'll still deliver that round at a short distance, but it'll sound as loud as a pea going through a straw. And he taught me how to make reloads and how to do short loads and do all different, because he was a Chicago cop also. And I'll tell you, Chicago cops, They may be cops, but they can get their hands dirty. And he taught me a lot of stuff. He taught me a lot of stuff about the gun business. And
Nick,
that's where I learned my expertise on doing, ammunition, guns, and everything else.
yeah. You're a healthy young man. You're in Chicago. Let's say you're in your, I don't know, 20s. Those guys were walking around. Why didn't you just pop one of them?
Well, I'll tell you why is because we still lived in Chicago. We didn't relocate. And I was concerned about, I knew what was on my agenda because now by this time I started talking to my uncles. I knew what was on my agenda, but I also had to worry about my brother and my mom. And my brother, there's a lot of stories there. My brother meant the world to me. And I knew that I had to worry about the repercussions. If they killed this guy in broad daylight with his family, there was no reason why they weren't going to come after us now, because like I told you before, a boy becomes a man. They knew they were going to have a problem. And the generations don't change. So what had happened was I was digging and I knew I was rattling some cages. And finally I thought to myself, you know what? I got to get out of Chicago. And that's what I did. I left Chicago, which was probably the worst thing I could have ever done. I say the worst thing, it was probably the best thing for me that I could have ever done, but probably the worst thing I could have done to my brother as a family. Because when I left, you have to understand, I knew what my agenda was going to be. So I cut off all ties. I didn't talk to my brother for 20 years.
Wow.
Because I knew I was going after these guys. And I by no means wanted my brother to get hurt even worse than he already was. Little did I know that my brother was already doing his own investigating and he was going to go after those guys as well.
So, Dan,
Joe, go ahead, John.
well, I wanted to ask Dan, so what were you, how did this affect, did you also have vengeance? Did you just leave it to your brother? What was the effect on you?
Joe, I think Joe, when you said that like you said, I would like to hear about your ideas for revenge, because I think you had a really interesting story about your own hunt. What was that? What steps did you take, Joe?
Well, I went off on more of a different path of, like you were saying, why didn't you just walk up and pop them? I mean, that's something that you don't want to do. If you want to get away with something, you have to collectively plan it and keep
You have
things
to be methodical.
you have to be methodical about it. We weren't connected like everybody else was. We couldn't do whatever we wanted and just be okay with that. So I went in different paths. I was getting tired of not getting answers. I was getting tired of going to where I thought you were supposed to go, because we were a family. We'd go to the police station and ask for updates or something along that, and they would tell you, well, we can't tell you anything because it's an ongoing investigation. We can't talk about anything. I'd say, an ongoing investigation? It was 30 years ago. How ongoing is it? What are you guys doing? And they would keep cutting you off. So, I went down different paths of connecting with other people, like my brother, were somewhere, law enforcement that sympathized with the story, and some were criminals that didn't know anything about it, but they just had information that I wanted or information that I needed. So I became friends with a lot of different people from very different walks of life. And
everybody in Chicago knew your story, so I think that everybody knew
that story. Yeah, everybody knew that story. And the more people you talk to, the more stories would come out of who was involved. And, oh, did you know that this guy was involved? This guy was in their pocket, and it would turn out to be police chief or a judge or some of the federal people. And, then you get more aggravated and more angry that you're finding out that people that are supposed to be protecting and on an up and up are more dirty than the people that were involved. So you just get more aggravated at that point,
Yeah.
And as a kid, you know, it was, and if you could understand this, maybe you can, maybe you can't. But as a kid, it was also embarrassing for us because we lost friends. People walked away from us. Friends walked away. We couldn't, people didn't want to associate with us because they thought maybe they're still in danger. We don't want our kids to be involved in getting hurt or whatever. Or people just walked away because they thought that my dad was a snitch, you know? So we lost a lot of friends. We lost family. It was a losing battle all the way down.
Yeah. Where now? Where are the both of you now? I mean, emotionally, your stability, is it behind you? Is it over?
I mean, I don't know on my end. I don't know that anything's really over. We're working on, we actually just got picked up for a docuseries.
Ah.
So that's going to be coming to light pretty soon. And we're working on another, more of a fiction-based series, which is being shopped around. So it's, I guess you can say it's, for me, it's put away to where I don't lose sleep over it. It doesn't aggravate me or bother me anymore. It's turned more into a focus of bringing the story out, because, you know, like when we sat in the trial, we became close with some of the other families. Like I became close with the Ortiz family.
Yeah.
And you know, the son struggled greatly with everything, and he still does.
Michael
Tony.
Ortiz, right? And
Yeah, it
so
was
Michael Ortiz, and then his son was
Tony.
Tony Ortiz.
Tony Ortiz. Yes,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah, and that's where I originally came to the point where I was like, you know what? Other people have gone through this. I want to bring to light the other side of the story of let's stop glamorizing, you know, all the gangsters, and let's bring the other side of it. No fault of whether they were a snitch or whether they were bad people. It's not them that we want to focus on. I want to focus on the family and what it does to the family or to the kids that are raised in that family that don't understand what the hell happened.
There was
So for me, I guess I would say it's it doesn't bother me. I mean, it doesn't bother me anymore. It's just you know, a focus of wanting to, like I said, bring out the effects and what it does to a family, like what it does to even Nick, myself, and my sister. I mean, that's still, you know, created a lot of animosity and.
Yeah. And Nick, how about you?
Well, I think it took a lifetime. It took a lifetime to get over it, but I think that I've especially once Lombardo died, I think that it was easier for me to get over. The only thing that I wish different is that I could have had a few hours with Frankie Schweitz. That would have made my life a little bit better, you know, if I could. Everybody talks about what a tough guy he was, and this and that. Boy, I wish the hell I would have paid an ungodly amount of money to have been with him in a room for 30 minutes.
Well, he didn't look so tough when you and I were at the arraignment, you know.
Exactly.
Oh, he was.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, there were marshals everywhere, and I still thought this is my once and only time to get him, but I didn't do it, and the feds, and if you can believe this or not, this is true, the feds sat me down right next to Nora Schweitz. Here my mind is still thinking, I want this guy. I can't get him. But you know what? I can be in this courtroom right now and punch his daughter straight in the face and watch his reaction and let him know.
He loved his daughter. He was close.
Oh yeah. But I don't know if she knew who I was, or I didn't much care.
So,
but I wanted him most of all. You know,
Joe raised a really good point about, you know, why didn't you go after him in the book? And I thought this is worth bringing up is, you know, you saw what happened to your family when you lost your father. And had one of you gone after him, had you just crossed the line and done this, you really would have risked, I mean, however cautious you had been, you really would have risked any number of consequences, whether they would have hunted you down or whether the police would have gotten you. And had that happened, then your families would have lost you much the same way. So
My-
it
That's
really
the only
was
thing that
My
saved
turning point at that was my turning point was,
that was
I was sitting and just looking at my kids and like, the fuck, I'm not gonna fucking do this to my kids. I'm not creating this wheel again, because there's always that sliver that you're
Right.
gonna get caught. No matter
Exactly.
how well it's planned or who's involved, there's always that 1% that you're gonna get caught, and there's no way in hell that I'm gonna screw up my kids' lives the way my life was screwed up.
I think it's really easy for people to read this and say, well, I would have gone and I would have. But
not
when I read when I read you saying that, you're writing it, I thought, yeah, I mean that's the responsible. That's what a person with a family would do. Is you take them down another way. You would take steps, and that's exactly what you all did.
You were you involved with any of these trials or hearings, or
I was there almost every day.
not the lawyer I was talking to?
Oh, sorry.
No, these the ones that came out of the Teamsters indictment were well before my time, and Family Secrets was after my time. I was not involved in it, but I do have a question for you two brothers. The fact that you and your mother were there, Joe, it gave the killer some pause, and Spilatro was even caught on a wire talking in Las Vegas about how furious Tony Accardo was that they went ahead with this. You were there.
Really?
Too.
Did you have any mixed feelings about the fact that Lombardo intervened and saved you and your mother? Did that cause you any kind of conflict?
For the longest time, through my entire journey, Lombardo was my sights. That was it. I didn't care about anybody else. That was the person that I wanted. And it actually wasn't until I had a conversation with somebody that you guys are all familiar with, Red Wilmette.
Yeah.
That actually had told me that, the only reason Lombardo went that day was to save us. So it was kind of like a little switch in my head, was like, yeah, the only reason I'm alive is because he actually defied orders and went that day and saved my mom and myself.
To wrap this up, Cam, you'll know better than I would. Paul, you'll know. Let's go over. Spilatro was beaten to death. What happened to the killers? Lombardo died.
They killed Feccarata because
Feccarata, yeah.
he screwed things up.
Feccarata basically screwed up the Spilatro's burial, so Feccarata was killed.
Right.
Lombardo died in prison. Frankie Schweiss died while on trial, didn't he?
He died at holding.
Right. There was a periphery murder to this case. One of the cars was hidden by Tommy Ebley in one of his underlings' garage. A guy named Nick Ciotti. Nick Ciotti's wife found the car, a woman named Daryl Ciotti. She told her mother about it, and Daryl Ciotti was killed shortly after, which was an awful thing. She was shot in the car.
Now, do you know the stuff that was in that car that they found? There was still stuff in the trunk of that car when they found it.
Yeah, exactly. I did. I didn't know what you were. They found the masks. Yeah, the ski mask. Right.
And they pulled DNA from hair that was in the ski mask.
Right. Right.
Wow.
And let's see.
This is 40 years later, and the car is still in somebody's garage.
Yeah. Can would one of you guys show us the book cover again and give us the title and so forth? I'm going to, by the way, post this on our.
Is Deadly Associates, the true story behind the murder of Daniel R. Seifert. And am I pronouncing it right, guys? I'm sorry. I have a really Seifert. My name is Camillus. People butcher it all over, so I apologize, but I can sympathize with you. Daniel R. Seifert and the conviction of reputed mob boss Joey the Clown Lombardo 3 decades later. Deadly Associates. It's a hell of a book. It's one of the few mob books out there that really deals with the fallout of one of these crimes instead of just the murder and a lot of the glorification that goes on. It tells the family story, and I really can't recommend it enough.
At the end of this video, I'm going to show you to our folks watching, listening, the cover, and there'll be our Blogspot address, and you can go to our Blogspot and you can order the book right from the Blogspot. It'll take you directly. It's on Amazon, I would assume, right?
Yes, correct.
All right.
Yes.
To wrap it up, it's been a little bit over an hour, actually. I thank you so much. This has really been fascinating. You know?
Sure, we appreciate you having us on.
Yeah,
Definitely. Definitely.
and
Thank
we'd
you.
be happy to join you whenever for another segment, because there's a lot that we didn't even touch base on.
There
The
is.
murder and stuff like that, which was kind of associated with it all,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And guys, I'd like to hook up y'all on some separate. This has really been great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We
Well,
appreciate
Again,
Technology being what it is and human attention span, an hour is about what flies. But, well, I'd love to. Paul?
yes.
All right. What do you say, sir? Cam?
Yes, I'm all about it. I think that we have barely scratched the surface with these two, and they definitely have a lot more to tell us.
Great. All right, fellas, take care. If you want to hang on, I'm just going to stop the recording, but the rest of us can continue to talk. Okay?
Sure.
it.